Hello and welcome to another edition of Photographica Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Without you, this podcast has no meaning. I mean that. And I just wanted to say thanks to Chad Lon, my old friend who produced the music for this podcast and all the links as well. And you can get in touch with Chad through his Twitter address at Chad Lon. That is ChadLelong. Chad Lon. And I just wanted to talk to you about the importance of subscription and rating. We need you to subscribe and rate. This is what we need, because without those, we don't get seen. And the more we get seen, the more we can do. So please, subscribe and rate us if you like what we're doing here. So, thank you very much for listening to Photographica Podcast. On with the show. Hi there, I've got an absolute cracker of an episode today. It's an interview, or conversation as I prefer to call them, with John Tiberi, John Boogie Tiberi, who is a photographer, and was a photographer in the early 70s. He was working as an assistant in the advertising studios of Soho, but his passion at the time was for music, and he wandered into a pub called the Elgin on Ladbroke Grove one evening and saw a band there called the 101ers, and the 101ers were fronted by a mesmerizing man called Joe Strummer. Many of you will recognize the name, and that Joe Strummer went on to front the Clash. John swiftly inveigled himself into the workings of the band, camera in hand, of course, taking pictures all the while, and became Joe Strummer's first manager, and managed them into a gig in a pub in North End Road, where he placed the 101ers at the top of the bill and found this little band called the Sex Pistols and got them to support the 101ers. That night, you can arguably say, is the night that punk was born. And although the phrase was heard over the Atlantic, maybe in connection with the New York Dolls and so on, the actual scene, the actual culture that we now know as punk, was born that night when John Boogie Tiberi put together the Clash, or what was to become the Clash, the 101ers and the Sex Pistols. And John was there, right at the epicenter of it all, taking pictures. He took the Sex Pistols, he was their first tour manager, and took them on tour to Berlin and took some beautiful pictures of, they're so innocent, of Sid Vicious and Johnny Rotten and all, just looking so young and so sort of beguiling, really. They're wonderful shots. He had an exhibition of those in Italy and Spain last year, and this being the 40th anniversary of punk, an anniversary or a commemoration that John is very unimpressed by, as you'll hear. There is some added interest around these bands and the culture at the moment, but John and I got completely lost in our conversation. You can tell it was so fascinating, and to actually speak to somebody who isn't reporting what other people said at the time. He was actually there, he was instrumental in what happened, and was, if you Google him, an absolutely crucial figure in that whole scene. This is what makes it so fantastic, is that he was a photographer, and it was taking pictures all the while, and is still going through his negatives. And I would love to know, I'd love to look through all of them. But I could go on, but please listen to it. It's quite a long conversation, but it's entertaining, and you can tell John is totally immersed in what he's saying, and that he's as fascinated in his memories as I am with them. So without further ado, I give you John Tiberi. Yeah, right. Okay, so we're actually
but you've
recording.
interrupted me because I was talking.
Oh,
now,
sorry.
what I'm trying to say was, I would like to get onto this thing about how the word is used now.
Okay.
Because
the word what? Photography.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's
Let's
start
use
there.
picture. Picture. if you were talking to a kid on the street or overhearing them, what would they be saying if they were thinking about, you know, the subject, the meeting we're about to talk about? But how would they refer to it?
Well, I think they just think of imagery they accept imagery much more than we do.
But lead you in further. They're pulling out their phones.
Yeah.
But what words are they using?
Image or...
No, they're not. Image.
Well, they're using a
my
snap.
image. Snap.
Yeah.
And Instagram. Do they actually use the brand?
Yeah,
Instagram?
they say as a verb. I'm going to Instagram. I'm going to Snapchat.
They're very
Facebook.
up on using the latest brand names, aren't they? It's almost like as if because I know the latest one,
right?
Like
so
WhatsApp you and da da da.
Yeah,
they might want to call it Instagramming or.
So you think that now they define the image by the medium as opposed to the way that it gets to people rather than because they.
Well, yeah.
Do you mean by that they've devalued the image?
No. I'm just thinking they're using a different word.
Right. Okay.
I mean, and more to the point, if you said to them, "Oh, you're taking a photograph," they might not really connect what they're doing with, especially if it's me, a grey-haired old bloke. You know, by definition, I'm talking about something different because I am an old bloke. But if it was one of their friends saying, "Oh, you're taking a photograph," and they might go, "Well, that's a funny guy."
But to me,
funny guy, someone they're saying, not a friend, but someone they don't know, at the same age. You know, why is he using that funny word? He's not from around here. You know, that's what I mean. And
I understand that, but I think aren't these two different value terms? Because isn't it that you value the image in a way differently?
But I am trying to let go as much of that as possible, and just thinking, what does photography?
Yeah.
I suppose the thing is it the same thing?
I don't think it is.
No.
I mean, I don't think it is from when... I mean, I'm, of the same sort of film era as you, where people did venerate the image more, the individual image more. I mean, Snapchat now, my understanding of how, of how people use it, is it is the ultimate consumer image app, in that once it's gone, it's gone. You take a picture, you send it to somebody, and it's gone. It's been... And I have a real problem getting my head around that. Like, not treasuring that image somehow, you know?
Well, I mean, I do like playing, as it were, with the motivation behind that. There's those... the sequence of almost opposite motivations. Because one of them, it would have been that, traditionally, your problem with your phone, it's a computer and it's got storage problems, it's got memory problems, it's got limitations.
Yeah.
So hanging on to all these photos is only going to fill the phone up.
Yeah.
So probably they thought in terms of like, and people only look at it once.
Yeah.
We'll build that into it.
Yeah.
You've only got 5 seconds to look at it.
Yeah, that's the value
then
of that.
became another thing. So images that you only wanted people to have for 5 seconds entered.
Yeah.
So a whole different way of taking a picture or purpose or stimulus.
Yeah. So if I accept that what you say is absolutely true, and I agree with you, okay.
Right. So it definitely is true.
So it definitely is true. I'm the ultimate arbiter. Where does that leave the photography that you've done and are doing now? I mean, where does that? What does that make you feel?
It does put it into another. It does by all of that put it into another place. And very much you can see it that taking place because of galleries and so on.
Sorry, what do you mean by that taking place? I mean, you mean?
I mean, it's you can see there's the use of the word artist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's to some extent still. No, I suppose because I come from that generation, I will still think, you're just kind of looking for a fight. What bother?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, it is what it is.
Yeah.
And, and what the word artist is overplayed anyway, but and that's an old, very old. Now, pretty old kind of. No one's bothered with that anymore. But
So Sorry, do you mean whether nobody's bothered whether you're a practicing artist, like somebody who considers themselves an artist, or somebody who just happens to turn up with their phone and snaps a few pictures?
Actually, you've opened a bit of a but something that I'm not that clear about myself.
Yeah.
Because then you've got the whole thing about why you're taking it. Are you a commercial photographer? Are you not?
Exactly. I think I'm very. I think that ambivalence is to be enjoyed.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because everybody tries to say, "What are you?" You know, and if somebody was to say to you, "What are you?" I would hope, if I was to ask you, I would hope that you didn't come back with some like answer like that. Well, I'm a I'm a street photographer. I'm a rock and roll photographer. I'm a commercial photographer. You know, that kills any kind of thinking, doesn't it? You know, don't you think we live in better times now that you don't have to define yourself?
Oddly enough, yes, I do, and I do think one's in a, less polarized and less pressured to.
Yeah.
But I mean, and especially when you consider like the way music's it's got no end of genres. It's been genreified, which is so tedious because but
that's a commercial thing, isn't it? I mean, I mean, usually it comes from a commercial place, isn't it? Because the market needs to know who you are in order to sell you.
I'm sure it does come from the record shop, but there needs to need to be able to show people where to go in the shop. Or,
it's which section are you in.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a reason for it. But I just wonder where because you've been photographing and looking at your apartment. It is an apartment dedicated to photography. This is not an apartment which is just that has a few photographic bits and pieces in it. I mean, I'm looking across at your sideboard and there's bottles of wine next to Rapid Fixer, and grabbing the wrong one could be disastrous. But but this is, you've lived photography for a long time. I don't mean that in a sort of.
Well, I like to hear that, because that's certainly. But I think what you're recognising is a lack of space and and the way I work, which is if I leave everything out. Yeah. Whatever I'm working on, I just leave it out, which is not good, because by definition, then when you look around, you think there's no space to do anything at all. But
well, I just want to put it into some.
But there was a time when I wasn't. I've gone through a phase of being quite ambivalent about my photography.
Right.
Yeah.
You seem to
and
be.
I'm kind of correcting that, and I suppose I am more comfortable to say my photography, because it's current. And it's all over the place.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
So just let's just establish where you are now then. So you are. I see a lot of your work is your current work, that is more sort of abstract street. You know, there's something about it that's a bit more. It's ethereal. It doesn't seem to respect the normal boundaries of what you might call street photography, which I always think kills. I think street photography is a killing term, because it kind of, like, what is it? Pictures of the street. You know, I mean, it's pictures of people, isn't it? You know, usually. But you're working in colour. You're working in digi and things like that. What can you kind of give me an idea of what's interesting you right now, today? You don't have to tell me what happened last week if you don't want to. But today, what's kind of interesting you?
Well, I'm in a. Well, I mean, in terms of, I think I can only simply kind of follow that. I mean, in terms of, like, something I'm, project. I don't know what word. Use too many cliches.
I tried to find another.
Because I'm thinking a lot and trying to get it onto the page, through the lens, about property, but that's partially to do with the way that I'm working through the old archive.
Property.
Yeah, I mean, so it's about the way that it dominates but it's a lot to do with the pictures I took back in the 70s of how the property was then and what people were doing with it, which was squatting. But it was about. I mean, it wasn't easy to take pictures of the people, because they were it was criminal. Well, actually, it was, in a niche. It was in a niche. It was sort of existed in a crack in the law.
Right. So when you
But
say
it was, nevertheless, people didn't want to be, it wasn't easy to photograph people. So, and I'm marrying that up with stuff that's around today a bit.
so property, but you mean built literally buildings?
Yeah, but that is very much about a sort of comparison or reconciling between the stuff I did, 40 years ago, and what I could look at now.
So how do you reconcile?
Or how I could look at it now.
So 40 years ago, though, and this is the 2016, which, as you mentioned to me, is the 40 years of punk anniversary, and which you're not particularly keen on, but you played a what you could say a pivotal role at that time in the history of punk. I've done some reading, Boogie.
Yeah.
And I mean, before we talk about that, how do you reconcile are you attempting to reconcile what was happening 40 years ago with your work now? Then, I mean, why did that idea come into your mind?
Well, I'd been because there is actually a sort of a connection, a sort of timeline, between the how I got involved with originally with music bands, which was Joe Strummer's first band. Yeah, and they were squatters.
Okay,
but wasn't like I was going to the sort of squatters concerts or anything like that. I mean, there were such things, but they weren't, But they were playing in a pub. It was part of the kind of syndrome of the time, this pub rock. Yeah. Because it was the only place. They were pretty versatile places, but they were usually very small. And it was the only way somebody just starting out, somebody just starting out could play. Yeah. But I mean, I came to it more from a music level. Yeah. Even though I knew very well what the environment. That environment is, or that scene, or whatever you call it, and it was more about. I think to some extent there was a sort of almost a sort of perfect combination that there was this really quite young, very energetic, almost. I mean, playing in an old genre, if you like, but very much in the moment, who were also coming from what was really mostly a pretty drab environment. Yeah. Now, squatting had all those kind of things added to it, sort of, Sort of,
I mean, it must have been grim in the early 70s.
But it was grim, yeah. It was grim. And there was a certain degree of us against the system, or against it, but losing. Yeah. But so sort of a recognition of our own sort of, of our own sort of victim mentality, a recognition of our own, sort of powerlessness, and to see these guys coming from, who were partially, you could see it, you could read it. They turned up. I mean, when I first saw them, I could have probably,
Who's that?
I'm the one I was playing in the pub in Ladbroke Grove. I probably had heard about it and heard that they lived in Elgin Avenue, which was a famous area of squatting, and so. But there was a certain, semiology in the way that they looked, and
so the 101ers were Joe Strummer's first band before the Clash.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And they'd had a Thursday night gig. I think it was a Thursday night for a few months at the Elgin on Ladbroke Grove.
Oh, right.
And they were amazing. I mean, the people were dancing in this really small bar. The stage didn't exist. Yeah. I mean, it was just a step up. A 6-inch stage, and it was very small, so they were all crammed on it. And Joe was so animated. He was just as animated, if not slightly more than he ever was with the Clash. Right. In this little bar. God. And it was that mix. Yeah. It was that mix. I mean, because I did really follow music. I used to listen to the only radio show that, John Pills was not actually that current anymore, even though he's a hero now. Right. there was this one guy called Charlie Gillett who used to do a sort of a gig guide at the
Charlie
end.
Gillett?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the Sundays.
Mm.
It was on Radio London.
Right.
And he used to have a few interviews with like Americans kind of acts who'd come over. I mean, not the big, not the big acts like Buddy Waters maybe, but they had a little gig guide at the end of the thing, so you'd listen to things to go to see, like Kelvin and the High Roads here, or Mickey Jump, who was a South End band,
right,
before the Feelgoods,
right,
there. And but I never heard of this band, so I kind of thought, but they ought to be heard, and so I got involved with them.
Right. And did you have a camera? I mean, were you taking pictures?
I did take a picture. I did actually take a 8mm movie camera.
Oh right, right.
And the film is very shaky and grainy, but it exists. Yeah.
Right. Have you transferred it onto?
Yeah. It's been used.
Oh really?
Yeah.
God, I'd love to see that.
In one of those histories of the Clash or something.
Right.
But
Right. So you were drawn because out of love of music to the scene, and then that must have. So from the 101ers, you kind of got involved, and that they became, well, then there was the Sex Pistols, and then there was the Clash.
It was I mean, I was really involved with them.
Yeah.
It was at a time when it's all a sort of combination of things, but it made for a good. There wasn't any money in it. We were all on the dole.
Yeah.
But I wanted them to make a record.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I got the idea. I know sort of why I got the idea.
Who is this? Sorry.
The 101ers, because I wanted it to be played on the radio.
Yeah.
That's why a band's got to make a record.
Yeah.
Classic. It's classic sort of. And we did in the end, but it took an awful long time.
Right.
And that I was working with them closely. I suppose 2 or 3 times a week gigging for about a year.
Right. And
photographing them, yeah.
And photographing them, yeah. And so, you saw then that there was value. I mean, there was an aesthetic value in photographing. It was something that connected you to it further. Was that way without sounding too
pretentious?
Actually,
I've been involved in photography prior to. I mean, more. I got into photography. I answered an ad, and I went to an advertising studio in Soho, and got a job working as an assistant
for a photographer.
Advertising photography.
Yeah. Right.
Which was
so this
was
is all
right because Soho was really exciting.
Yeah.
The money was all right, but nothing.
I know what it was like
actually
being
in those days.
Yeah.
In those days, it was it was all right.
Yeah.
I mean, and the place was damn interesting,
Yeah.
And I sustained because I got to learn stuff. People wanted to tell me how to do this, people.
Yeah.
And
so I didn't know that you had a sort of classical photographic training.
Oh yeah.
Right. Okay.
I mean, the idea was you graduate. The different kinds of jobs in the studio, you might gravitate through to taking pictures.
Yeah.
But you'd have to go through pack shots.
Yeah.
Which
well, I did the same.
They were okay. Yeah. Pack shots were all right.
Yeah.
But
I never
nobody
mastered
else
the
was
pack
really
shot.
interested in them.
No, I wasn't the world's greatest assistant, I gotta say. But anyway, we'll move over that. But I mean, so I didn't realise that. So this was when? This was like before you met the 101ers. So
It was 10. That was 10 years before.
Oh, I see. Okay,
that's like 67.
So you came to that scene with your camera in your hand already, not like some guy who just picked up a camera and thought, "Fuck it, I'll have a go." But you thought you actually had an intention. You knew what you were doing.
Well, I went to be honest. I went to answer that job not with no particular answer the ad for that job. I mean, it looked like it popped out of the newspaper. I went and I got the bloody job.
Yeah.
It was actually
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just fortune.
So just to establish something which I haven't, you were brought up in London.
Well, I was looking at these pictures. My father was. I was born in Earls Court. My father was an art dealer.
Right.
So, in terms of.
So you had art from you had
yeah. Well, there you
images. So I'm looking.
go. I
at
mean,
some
you don't have to
negatives.
examine it, but they're.
This is your family home.
Yeah, that's the family home. Those are the walls of the flat I was brought up in.
God, it looks like Christmas in.
It was actually Christmas time.
Yeah, and it's
But
just got
I remember once when the man
crammed with paintings.
Yeah. We had it. This is the 50s, and actually that would be the 60s, wasn't it? But I mean, I remember when the man came out to fix the TV. He had to really look hard to find it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can see why. It's just the place is just full, wall to wall. It looks incredibly elegant, I have to say.
I think to some extent I was.
And you took these pictures.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That would have been later when I went back to see my father, who was living on his own there.
Right. Amazing.
But.
God.
And one of those pictures there is a picture by a guy called Colquhoun, who was one of the angry young men kind of Soho set. There's an abstract.
Okay.
And I didn't realise, my father didn't keep it for very long because it was so big.
Right.
But he was really rather.
So you had.
He had. I mean, if you you'd have to look closely, but it's a complete melange of everything from Victorian to portraits to.
So that was the world you grew up in.
Yeah.
And then you go and become a photographer, and you really do become a photographer.
And my father tells me it's not art, you know.
Right. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But because I'd wanted to go to art school.
Right.
And they weren't going to let me in those days because I hadn't managed to get a grade in art O-level.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you mean they wouldn't, as in the school?
Yeah, the school.
Right. Not your parents.
No.
Your parents were quite keen on you becoming.
No,
an
they
artist.
were. They would have loved it. I mean, would have. No.
Right.
Neither of my parents had academic backgrounds.
Yeah.
Actually, academic in terms of when.
Yeah,
they both started work at 16. I'm not saying they defined that, they pushed that on me.
No.
But on the other hand, they didn't.
Yeah.
I think I didn't want to. So as far as I was concerned, it was a bit of a failure.
Right.
Not being able to go, or not going to
Right.
art school. And actually,
So you became
from what I learned later, I actually took it too easily. I could have insisted and gone along and said, but
I know.
I've got a painting in me, you know, or something.
Yeah, well, exactly. So did you think that did you turn to photography because it was art, and you felt that you could address that failure, that sense of failure that you hadn't gone to art school?
It was,
Right.
Yeah.
So it's funny because I often ask people why they got into photography, and I can honestly say it's the same for me. You know, that I had the same, not exactly the same, of course, but I felt that that I didn't do well at school. I did very badly at school, and I got kicked out and so on. And it was something that I thought I could do that would, in a funny kind of way, you couldn't be judged by anybody else. If you became a photographer, then nobody can give you a grade for that. You know, it's like, I'm a photographer. It's very easy to say it. You know, now I print, but you know, these are things which you don't have to achieve an arbitrary grade in. You can just go and do it, and then when you've done it, you can take on the guise of a photographer. Is that something that you can recognise? Right, that's interesting. Yeah,
there are some internal kind of gradings, though.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you.
But apart from
I just totally agree with that. You know, they're specific to your own peculiarities.
But they come. I think from advertising that thing where the loop was the god.
Yeah. I know. I can't agree more. I don't want to have a conversation that's all about what it was like working in advertising.
No,
studio.
but I know.
But back in the day. But
how do I do?
Totally agree with you.
How do I deal with it now, though? You know,
Watch
I
out
have
for
to.
Your mic there.
I have to.
Yeah.
I have to be really, really careful. Not careful. I mean, being careful is then swerving the other way. But I just recognise that I have been, sort of almost genetically implanted with a highly critical eye on certain things.
Yeah, but and do you,
it was taken as automatic in those days.
I totally agree. And
know.
do you this is fascinating. I think this is fascinating 'cause it's something which I think about a lot. Have you ever tried to forget that? That leave that attitude
It's out of
behind.
focus. It's out of focus. You know.
And
That's it. I've now got to find some other pathway to look at it.
If there's a book called,
but I've been shown the door.
Right.
If you say, you can't argue with it.
No. Okay. I mean, so you've never shrugged off that sort of technical sort of critical mindset.
If it's other people's work, was it more? I was looking at some stuff in the show a week or so ago, where I kind of think, they're just putting this on the wall because it is out of focus.
Yeah.
So never even then. But I suppose looking at someone else's work, I'm saying, yes, I can see what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, there's a book that Thames and Hudson published a couple of years ago called Why It Doesn't Have to Be in Focus by Jackie Higgins, and exactly about the broad range of photographic treatments aesthetic treatments you can get now. I agree with you. I've felt like for a long time, I felt like I had to forget what working in several advertising studios gave me at a very young age, which was a technical competence, which I don't actually honestly see very much in general. I don't think it's as necessary as it once was. But, and so I felt slightly ashamed of it, my life, having that thing. It's like, it's like being a little bit, too well brought up or something like that, in a sort of crazier scene. I felt slightly self-conscious, and now actually I'm embracing it. I don't care. I'm older now. I don't have to worry about what people think so much. So I kind of enjoy the fact I do know how a camera works and how Scheinflug's maneuver goes on a 5.4 camera and things like that. Not that I would ever use it now, but I quite enjoy it. I don't feel that tension in me anymore. I just relax about it, really. But is that? Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that you should. I expect you to feel.
Well,
the
I
same.
wanted to. I mean, at the time, I wanted to do reportage. That was more or less the title for it back in those days. But nevertheless, that sort of influence, which is more than an influence, that of certain checkbox kind of thing about looking at your own work.
Yes. Well, you didn't think it made the grade. Were you being ultra critical and saying?
I remember just the environment where if it's got to be a reshoot, and nobody was happy.
I know.
But we were going to do it anyway.
Yeah.
And to some extent, that I'll never lose that.
So that perfectionism.
I often think about reshoots nowadays.
Really. Really?
Yeah. Like, I'll go back. It'll still be there. I'll go back and do it again.
Right. I mean, I suppose now that the idea of doing reshoots is actually even more.
Well, who? Yeah. I don't know.
You can because
but in those days it was all. I mean, the client might have even gone home, gone back to their office or whatever, and the stuff comes back from the lab at the earliest possible time would be 3-4 hours.
Yeah, and then you'd be sitting around.
And you've got to call them back, or because instead of sending this stuff over, and but the mood.
Yeah.
That's what I mean about the influence. Is that I can be, one can have that.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's
So how did that go?
A weakness of self-criticism. But I mean, I'll never, describing the whole event, describing that stuff in the past. It's interesting that there was a sort of team spirit to, you just had to do it again.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry about that.
That's right.
But I mean,
But where did that fit in with the whole punk thing? Because the punk thing is opposite of that entirely.
No, it's not. Well, the punk thing is a lot of shit.
Right. Okay.
I mean, looking at the the context of the 101ers, I mean, they weren't working towards punk.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
No. I mean, they didn't. If you'd laid that out and said, "Hey, I've come from the future,
Yeah.
and there's this thing you could sign up for now. It's called punk. These are the criteria." None of them would have said yeah.
Right.
Including Joe.
Right.
But I mean, I suppose that's the way I'm kind of leading into that story all the time, aren't I? I mean, because when we were involved, when we were working together, I arranged this thing, this event at a bigger pub, one of the bigger pubs called the Nashville on North End Road.
Right.
Where the Sex Pistols played on the bill with us, with the 101ers, they played as a support.
Right.
And that actually turned into sort of that actually was a total catharsis for Joe.
Right. And for punk then.
Well, it was actually possibly the name that, as a result of that show, was possibly the time when that name was first used.
Really?
Yeah.
How was that?
But the thing is, Joe did want to stop doing what he was doing and do this other thing. So in a way, if using my little sort of device, which is the man from the future,
Yeah.
I suppose I have to.
Well, you are the man
rethink
from the future now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know which way you mean that, but
No.
I would like my photography to.
Yeah.
Phew, that'd be great, wouldn't it?
Well, yeah, but you've still got the shots. I've
Yeah.
seen some. I mean, you've still got the shots. So what?
But the thing is, which if you take the idea of sort of seizing the opportunity and using the tools at your disposal and taking control of your life, to some extent, I would say that was what I saw in the 101ers. But I don't kind of think it's what the punk is more synonymous from today's angle. Oh dear.
Yeah.
You didn't plan for that, did you?
Yeah, I'm just. Right.
But punk from today's angle is more or less synonymous with that horrible phrase underclass.
Can we just say that one again?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to cut
You're
that
gonna
out.
cut that?
Yeah.
Oh.
So punk was synonymous.
Punk is in today's use of it, which clouds the events of whatever 76, 77, 78.
Yeah.
In the history books, let's say. But today, I find that in today's usage, and it is more or less synonymous with the word, the term underclass.
Yeah.
It's a sort of victim.
Yeah.
Woo!
That was,
Everything's going on. Well, more than a sort of victim, it's pretty much a self-labeling victim.
Right.
I've been fucked over.
Yeah.
And that is not what I saw.
Right.
Either in the 101ers or in the Sex Pistols.
Absolutely. What
not.
did you see then? Just
like those things, using the tools at your disposal, taking control.
Right. So they weren't victims.
Of the environment, of the medium.
Yeah. So they weren't victims. They were.
They certainly weren't victims. No.
They
weren't
were
self-resigned. They weren't self-resigned. We're going to,
nihilists.
They weren't even guerrillas, kind of going to hide in the bushes and wait until our chance comes. They were just coming out and saying, "We're young and we're going to do stuff."
So just going
break
back
out of the confines, because I was talking about one thing about a certain relationship with education when I left school. Relationship with education, whether or not you achieved, deserved to achieve. That's one thing. Things have slightly changed a little bit in this, but 10 years later. But that was more to do with you're not even going to get a job.
Yeah.
And will the job still exist?
Yeah.
Will there be enough electricity to power the factories? Yeah. We're all being told to take shit and be victims.
Right. And this was sort of an affirmation of hope.
Well, for people that were young and coming up, then it was, this is what we've got, and we're going to make, find advantage where possible, but do something.
Right. And so, why did you photograph it then? Because
well, I was one of the reasons I mentioned going back to the time of, when I started working in an advertising studio, was because I also started taking my own pictures, and I did some stuff around about, what they call street photography, but I also was going to gigs, and I used to take the camera to gigs. But it was a very sad situation for me. Well, not very sad. Enough of the sadness. It was a very staid kind of photography where you're staring up, up the noses of people in the front row. And I really found it just so unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
I more or less stopped doing it.
Yeah.
But the thing about doing these guys was partially because of the thing about how they were, off on the road, that sort of.
It was kind of a reportage.
And I also needed to take pictures to try and get them in the newspapers.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was kind of reportage. I mean, your pictures of the Sex Pistols in Germany.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a reportage.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't matter whether that was a political word.
But I took very little, apart from some of those things that I've been showing you of the Clash, I actually took very little of any of them on the stage.
Yeah.
Well, much more so.
But they're not, I mean, as you say, they're not really that interesting when they're on stage. They're more, in a way, they're more interesting when you see, there's that picture of John Lydon I'm thinking of in is it Munich Airport or...
Oh, that one.
And he's just looking straight at the camera, and he just looks like a little boy. I mean,
they're sort of using the camera, both him and...
What's that?
Using it.
Yeah.
So, because that's an interesting thing you get when you're just spending a lot of time with each other, which you wouldn't necessarily get in any other type of, in any other, even reportage role, unless you do embed yourself.
Exactly, and it's very, and I think that's an interesting point, because I often find, and this applies to the photography that I do, that I much prefer to be inside something than just
true,
as an observer. So I'd rather put myself at the point of view of the people I'm photographing than being sort of somehow sort of like a crow surveying what pickings it can get. I've always seen that as a very cold position to take. Looking down on people, whereas if you're in there, then it's a slightly braver situation to be in, but it's warmer. It's more humane. Does that? I don't know if you agree with that.
I do a lot, and I was just thinking about how it's interesting that people are consciously doing that more nowadays. I think that people are doing projects where they're staying in environments.
Yes, I think that's
for
true.
long
actually,
periods.
I mean, people.
This is suddenly recently, actually, because I think the whole digital news part and everything has all been a kind of just, it's gone back to the old kind of Fleet Street to have go here, go there, bring back a picture, within a day, sort of thing.
Well,
whereas, the medium is opening up a bit more to seeing a more honest.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working with a friend at the moment who's a writer, and we're trying to go over to the jungle or to Dunkirk to photograph children in the refugee camps, and it's as simple as saying to a newspaper, "Do you want us to go?" And they can say yes, go. We'll print the pictures, or we'll run the story, or whatever, and you can do it. There's a sort of freedom of movement now, although it's much less. What would you call it? Structured? Like we won't. They'll probably pay us fuck all. But they will print our pictures beautifully and print the words beautifully, and it will look, and we'll get a story out there on the nod of somebody without the commitment that I think you would have needed to have, say, 30 years ago or even 20 years ago, because we're shooting digi, because we work really quickly. That is, I mean, having said all this, it is hard to embed yourself in a place like that in the way that you did, say, with the Sex Pistols, or you're an observer. I mean, if I go into a situation like that, it's as an observer. I can't really.
When do you think you're going to be
next
doing
week?
that? Are you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're just waiting for the Independent to.
How long would you think you'll stay there?
Wait. It
would you have enough time to spend time there?
Not that sort of time. Not the sort of time that you need to live. To really live it. I'm not thinking of that. I'm thinking more from the point of view that the children. People are making this definition at the moment between economic migrants and refugees from tyranny, Well, I would argue that children, it really doesn't matter. You know, I mean, whether they're the child of an economic migrant or fleeing terror, they're children and they didn't have a say in it anyway. So they're in a different class, is what we're trying to say. So, you know, we'll see. We'll see if we get
I wonder if, though, as much as I support it.
What's your mic?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
As much as I laud the, it was great, well done. You know, I mean.
I was only illustrating the point, really, that we're fleet of foot now. We can do.
We are.
But what were you going to say? You're not so sure.
I mean, you
that.
brought up something, and you observed something in what we were talking, and that thing about a rock band, which it's quite powerful. It is powerful though, even though that is just a rock band. You know,
no.
It is quite. It is.
It's anthropology.
It is the thing about. Yeah, it is absolutely, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Because that's the next thing I was thinking of.
Right.
You know, how if you're in the jungle, you just got to sit there and wait for the animals to get used to you.
Well, well,
and I don't mean I meant the David Attenborough.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, and it's that thing of disappearing, isn't it? When I've noticed, I think I'm not the first person to think this. I'm pretty sure Martin Amis wrote this in a book once, and I can't remember which one it was. But if you stand still, you disappear. You know, you literally you go invisible, and I
Who was that? Who's that?
I think it was Martin Amis, and it could have been in London Fields or something like that. I can't remember, but it was about somebody creeping into somebody's bedroom. This is a half remembered thing.
Oh my God! Yeah.
He crept into somebody's bedroom, and he realised that even if the person woke up, he would disappear, because he was still, and that's something which I've noticed in photography, both metaphorically and practically speaking, is absolutely true. The moment you stop moving, in a crowd or anywhere, is a moment that people kind of discount you. You're off the radar, and then you can start shooting. It's when you're moving around and you're very visible that you can get people. And then perhaps in a way, when you're embedded with, say, somebody like the Sex Pistols, you are still, in terms of their trajectory, you're moving at the same trajectory as them, so you can shoot with them.
The standing still though is very true. It's quite you sort of intuitively or automatically think that I better keep moving, but there's not. No.
Yeah, that's true. Isn't it? I mean,
you stand still and people will just. I mean, especially if you kind of if you're looking as well, like just obviously just looking. Oh, look at that. Oh. I think sometimes people will maybe walk past and sort of look too. I mean, it depends. Body language is a funny one, isn't it? Because taking photographs, you really see how much talking goes on. But I mean, there's a certain. It's not an art. It's just a certain automatic way of just kind of just like saying I'm just going to stop and be invisible. Yeah, there is.
It's funny. It's quite a. From the point of view of being a photographer who wants to report on the world as they find it, rather than sort of being a sort of advertising or some sort of dream teller, sort of constructor of stories. I like I much more gravitate towards the sort of photography that is a synthesis of the photographer and the situation that they found themselves in. So it's not like nobody's pretending that the view that the photographer took is the only view that could ever have been shot of that image, of that situation, of that event or whatever. But what you see in the picture is a tension between who the photographer is and what was going on in that they were shooting. What I mean is like the projection. So, for example, if you look at a Rembrandt portrait, you're not looking at a cold portrait. What you're looking at is the tension between, or the dynamic between the painter and the sitter. It's a projection of the painter onto the sitter that is the canvas. And I that's what I like when I look at pictures. I like when I look at your pictures that you shot, say the ones I'm pretty familiar with of the Sex Pistols in Germany, that there's it says a lot about you in those pictures. Because you were there to, because they felt comfortable with you, because they didn't feel threatened. They weren't seeing you as a prying eye. You know, which I guess is just the same thing as what we've been talking about. But I think it's slightly different in the sense that nobody else could ever have taken those pictures.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you take me back to the moment, because there were a sort of mix of people who were teenagers. So there's a sort of mix of people who have almost slightly different motives.
Right.
Which makes them particularly interesting.
Or,
I mean,
between
musicians do anyway to a great extent.
I don't understand how a band stays together.
Well, they're not necessarily going to. But then when you look back at the kind of, you know, the kind of example that was set by, you know, the Beatles and the Stones, you kind of they're quite artificial. There's some other element at work there, possibly that. They became the kind of a benchmark for a dream, kind of, you know, a perfection or something. But I mean, anyway, the point being that people at that age then having something in common which will endure for it's mad, you know. But
they've got to be committed to.
But there is a way of working. It's just, I mean, it was interesting how people would use the camera. You know, that's what I mean.
But you weren't taking it because of. I mean, the pictures are not celebrity pictures.
They won't all use it the same way, and sometimes they even in the same picture, people are using it in different ways.
Well, exactly. Yeah, I know. I mean,
yeah.
Do you mean when they say use it? Do you mean they're using the camera using
to some
you?
extent, yeah.
I see. Sorry, I wasn't with you. Okay. So you're So they will play with the camera, play with their image. You know, make themselves look vulnerable, make themselves look fierce, or whatever. Yeah. According to their own.
I think that's almost something that you could do around rock photography.
Yeah.
I think most everything
that's
else.
Interesting.
Everything else you can do with rock photography is, you know, wipe your ass with it, possibly. But I mean,
I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's like anything. There's good. There's good, and there's bad.
Well, it's because of the. It's because I don't know. That comes from a lot of different places.
Yeah.
It comes from the sort of time of the 70s with the sort of, you know, it was almost like the music press was a mafia.
No. Right.
You know?
Yeah, powerful as well, wasn't it?
They were, yeah. And they really, they kind of knew it. You know, they almost promoted it. The image, but
what would?
But and that was the vehicle of rock photography.
Right.
You know, I think that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
In the way I'm using it. And
right.
I mean,
if
you look at some of the names around now, actually, they come from that era.
Right. Yeah, like Mick Rock.
That Sheila Rock.
Sheila
Mick
Rock.
Rock. I don't know. Was he a photographer too? Because anyway, they had they I don't know. They got married, I think.
The Rocks.
It's not a coincidence. They
made little boulders, little stones.
But there are other musician photographers. I mean,
well, what was the difference? Can I just take you back, because I wanted to really concentrate on your experience. I mean, but when you were photographing these young lads who you could never have told what their history would be, what their future would have been, or what their history would now be, did you get the feeling that they all perceived, as you had a camera and you were photographing, that they all perceived the value of the image? You know, like you said, they were different, but did they all think that because you had a camera that they would use that camera, or were, for example, was Sid less aware of the camera than Johnny Rotten, or you know?
No, I think to some extent they're more or less. Interesting. I think Sid was less. Wow, it's a funny. I mean, to break it apart, I'm thinking more in terms of how they kind of did it when they were together. Mm-hmm. So as a sort of, I mean, literally as a bunch of friends, how they would bounce off each other. But then they had, you know, different ideas of how they would look. Yeah. Or how it would be interpreted, or might be interpreted. Rather.
Yes.
But I mean the.
Which they would discuss? No. Right.
They wouldn't be discussing it.
No, they wouldn't plan out their media profile then.
I mean, they had a little bit of an image problem, oddly enough.
Really?
Considering that they're supposedly very self-confident
Yeah.
image-wise.
Oh, you mean
well,
image?
I suppose,
they were
I suppose Lydon, you know, he's pretty he is confident. He is. The others less so. The others a little bit more comedian-like.
Yeah.
Certainly, I mean, oddly enough, it's very, you know, it's very prescient with Bowie's death. But I mean, it's just odd. And I'm saying oddly, but you know, it's not odd. It's kind of quite almost predictable that they were both, Lydon and Sid, really respected more than respected, adulated Bowie.
Really?
Mainly because of his, not mainly from a mixture of reasons, but I think they understood his relationship with the image.
Right.
That he was, you know, in control of it ostensibly.
Right.
Or at least acted as if he was, and the acting was maybe all of it. You know.
Yeah.
You could, because the whole process, you don't know how it's going, how it's going to get used and, you know,
That's
distorted by the process, but to act as if you are.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I've never, well, I mean, I'm not the world's greatest expert, but I would never have thought about that before, because they seem to give, you know, to the layman like me, they seem to give, it looks like they give no thought to it whatsoever, that they just turned up and they were showmen, but they were quite naive about it.
But if I'm not talking, I am talking about the, you know, in front of the camera, but I wasn't actually wholly talking about
yeah,
the camera.
sure.
Because John would particularly, and Sid would have this kind of dressing up thing.
Right.
And it wasn't dressing up for a party effect. I mean,
Right.
It was like, how are we going to, you know, do our hair differently?
Right.
Like today or this week.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit, you know, sort of girlish. But I mean,
yeah, but they
no,
had to. I mean,
they made it a sport.
Yeah, right. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, in terms of they took that sort of the thing from you know, greatly influenced by Bowie.
Yeah.
They took it from the sort of, you know, media sphere, if you like, and enacted it in a real world way.
So it fed back to them,
and it in an everyday way. They kind of engendered their life. You know, it made you know, it was like they were doing the theatre of Bowie, if you like. You know, doing the theatre of and the absurd.
Yeah.
You know, to some extent, pretty clearly where Bowie was getting some of his motivations.
So that's very interesting.
And they were reenacting it in a way, reportraying. Certainly, I mean, and the other thing is that you get, you know, very often, you know, that sort of thing that happens with musicians, and I'm sure the Stones kind of discussed. No, I'm not sure. But possibly they discussed how they were going to look.
Yeah.
And possibly they didn't. But it's usually around a sort of demographic, if not class, you know, geographical.
Yeah.
Just basically, you know, same school or same area.
Yeah. So they had.
And but the thing about the original bit, but the Pistols themselves, who couldn't be more diverse in London. Lydon was Finsbury Park,
right?
Where you had to be a bit sort of careful about. Well, it was a working class area and a little bit, a bit sort of hard. You know, you couldn't look too outrageous, but you could maybe as well. Depending on how you did it. If you looked like you knew what you were doing.
Yeah, and you looked confident with it.
Yeah, so that explains an awful lot. And and Sid and Stephen Paul from Shepherd's Bush. Different teams, you know, very much different parts of it. But I mean, now where was I going with all this? And then there was this other bunch that was actually started to become their fans, who came from Bromley, of all places, which, ironically, is very close to Beckenham.
Right, back to David Bowie,
That period.
Yeah.
No,
what was about South East London?
But talking about photographers, there's a guy called Ray Stevenson, who photographed him in that period. Bowie, who has the only photographs of him in that period.
Oh, really?
And he was also one of the first ones to catch into the Pistols and shot this bunch I'm talking about from Bromley.
Oh,
which is actually Susie and the Banshees. Susie.
Right.
And her boyfriend, who was a bass player, I can't remember his name now, and a few of these other people. Now they would go to, and so part of this theatre
Yeah.
Which probably, the closest way I can tie it down is this thing with influenced by Bowie. But, and acting it, or using it, is they'd go to the Pistols gigs. No other groups. It was going to be the Pistols.
Yeah.
And they weren't going to turn up at Stranglers gigs. It was the Pistols, and they would turn up there. These people they call the Bromley contingent by the NME, but they were and they really didn't have any other level like politics or football teams or anything. It was all to do with it's our look.
Right.
It was our security but individual looks.
Amazing.
I mean, and when he went to the grand part of the Pistols was when I saw them first. It was John's bravado.
Yeah.
Total bravado. I mean, the way he would hold a room.
Yeah.
And with a band who could hardly play.
Yeah.
Let alone him sing. It didn't matter. He would hold a room. He would almost threaten an audience.
Yeah.
And then these characters in the audience.
Yeah.
It's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
It was like going into the set of Cabaret.
Right.
In Trent's Berlin.
Yeah.
Which is, oddly enough, how come we went to Berlin? I mean, it was a no-brainer.
Right.
That's why I chose it.
So as their road manager, tour manager, whatever you want to call it.
I don't know what I want to call it, but it was, I was...
So you took them to Berlin, and that's where these photos came from. But it's amazing to have seen that from the perspective that you saw it.
Isn't necessary. Yes, it is. It is a peculiar. It was a wonderful time. It was a wonderful time. I mean, I tripped up on it, into it.
Yeah.
I mean, as I say, one level, the one others was sort of just kind of by chance, but then the whole development of the Pistols thing, it really was just, and then meeting Malcolm and getting an idea. Because Malcolm had been playing around from leaving art school, doing, pretty much nothing, except having one or two little occasions of luck. He got to do the costume on a film based around Teddy Boys.
Right.
And played around with. He went to New York and tried to play around with the New York Dolls, trying to sort of repackage them, which fell over terribly. But he didn't. He continued. He wasn't put off. He had to reshoot.
Right. Yeah.
So, and it's got to be. I'm just offering my adulation across the years to Malcolm's visionary, because he I don't think he controlled any element of these characters really.
Yeah.
I think he might have acted more like a sort of a sort of Val Parnell or some sort of cigar toting kind of guy. But that was a bit of an act. I don't think he believed he had any he wasn't instructing any of these people.
But there's that photo of him when they signed with EMI outside the Palace.
Yeah.
And there's that look in his eyes of like...
He's a bit of a chameleon, but, that was a setup by a bunch of guys from the record company.
Right.
So it really was. He managed to get them to have their mad ideas too. I mean, there's a bunch of guys who were very odd. They're the strangest record company I've ever met. Yeah. I mean, A&M Records.
A&M, yes.
I mean, they were basically, it was an office in Fulham Road that was paid by America.
Right.
And they were the strangest bunch of people.
Right. And but he manipulated them into...
You just kind of, it was contagious.
Right. So between...
Branson did the same.
Right.
Started having these, slightly more public school mad ideas. But
yeah. But so John, just coming forward in time now, where do you see those pictures? Do you, when you look at those pictures now, what do they mean to you? I mean, what do they? Are they more important as a record of the time, or as as a sort of testament to your involvement with it? That's pretty something.
It is. I don't think I've done a good enough job to be a record of the time, but I would like them to be.
Right.
Yeah. I mean,
Well, I don't. I mean,
I'm not sure what the context is still, even though we're 40th anniversary, blah blah. But I don't. I mean, I think the medium the gallery medium is a good medium.
You mean for distributing? I mean,
I
for
love
showing them.
I love the way people kind of have a reverence.
That exhibition you had in Italy last year. What was? How did that go?
Well, I had one in Italy, which was a pretty small place. It was all right, but not great.
Right.
I had one in a place in Spain that was a kind of a community art centre, which was rather good because it was a really Spanishy kind
They're
of.
They're quite punk.
But they kind of. I suppose they were just excitable.
Yeah.
I haven't really shown them in England. Oh gosh, I haven't shown my pictures in England. Are those can't.
Well, I'm sure
there was a small show, but I really don't like the mixed. When I was in the mixed show, and it's not that I don't like other photographers.
Yeah.
I'm down on the anniversary thing, and I'm really down on the kind of rock photography format.
Yeah. And just being bundled in with, and the pictures would just be bundled in with that.
Yeah, bundled as a word. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, if it's about the story of the punk era, then there are other bits that I don't have, which they would.
But this is a very important. It was a very important time in culture. Whether you're into the punk thing or not, or whether one is interested or not, you can't deny what came out of that, and to have seen it from that perspective, that you both experienced it and photographed it, is you can't do anything about that. That's important,
Well, there are things about the way in which people work together as well. I mean, groups work together, or musicians work together, and I think to go inside the sort of simplistic sort of history, and to go into areas like that is stuff that, and I think that is possible using my images.
Yeah. Sorry, to what? To
using my images rather. I mean, I don't think I've got a really thorough photographic image, related history to the whole thing. But I do think I've got stuff about how it worked or how it happened to come to pass.
But also with a unique view, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I like the way people relate to pictures when they see them on the walls.
Yeah.
I like the way they stare at them, the way they absorb, and give it. I don't know, sometimes a minute, sometimes 10 seconds. But I like the way they do that.
So that's the
most for me. If you're saying how do I see it, I don't know that any other way comes close to that really. I mean, in books, obviously, one loves to be in books because you might make some money out of it. But and people possess your book. It's a nice feeling.
So you prefer to see your
books are good.
Yeah,
but
books are So do you prefer prefer on the wall?
Yeah.
Okay. John, listen, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and it's gone on way longer than I was planning to, but it's really good. We've been going for quite a long time. So listen, thank you very much, John. And we have to shake hands. You see, we'll shake hands on tape because it's.
Do that again.
Yeah, let's do that again. Okay. Crack your knuckle. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, John. That was great. Okay.
Well, you're very good at it.
Oh, thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, or anything like as much as I did, because it was such a fascinating history to learn about firsthand. Please don't hesitate to write to us. You can get our details from the program notes attached to the podcast. And almost most importantly, leave comments and ratings at iTunes, because that's how we're going to get seen. And I am deeply grateful to you, and I will certainly name check you in the next podcast. So just leave those ratings and comments. And if you've got any comments that you'd like to send in directly to me, you can send them to me at alex@asprinting.net, and I will guaranteed get back to you. Till next time, goodbye.